So we got some more fasting quotes. We're going to be talking about wet versus dry fasting today. So fun quotes from Jason Fung, very modern, popular researcher and doctor talking about fasting. And a lot of his fasting talks are about weight loss. But in his book, The Complete Guide to Fasting, he says we are wired for feast and famine, not feast. But we are wired biologically. We have been evolutionarily designed to have periods of fasting and periods of feasting or feeding. And then hunger is a state of mind, not a state of stomach. And so that's something we'll get into when we start talking about, well, how do we deal with that hunger? How do we deal with when we're fasting, wanting to eat and feeling these hunger pains? But it's a state of mind and not an actual state of needing to eat. And then Elson Haas, who I don't know a lot about, but he has a book called Staying Healthy with Nutrition. And he says fasting is the missing link in the Western diet. And so wet versus dry, what's it mean? So wet fast is when you are drinking water, and you can add electrolytes to these water and you're staying well hydrated. In a healthy water fast or wet fast, we are making sure that we drink extra water to keep ourselves more easily feeling well. It helps reduce headaches. It helps keep us more energized when we add in, especially those electrolytes, the sodium, potassium, and magnesium. It helps us stay steady. I've noticed when I do the electrolytes, even just with a water fast, when I do electrolyte water or just plain water, the headaches are less noticeable, the hunger is less noticeable, and the fast is just in general, it's just much easier. But a dry fast, when we come into dry fasting, there's no water, zero water, not even taking showers or washing your face. No cheating, no cheating. You absorb water through your skin. So if you're on a dry fast, no cheating, no taking that water in through the skin. And then that they say is that like dry fasting is definitely more impactful. And the little anecdote is like 1 day of dry fasting is like 3 days of a wet fast. And so typically, um, I'll do like for a longer fast, I'll do wet. And then on like the last day or two, I'll do dry to just like kind of finalize, really just like get deep into whatever's left. And so when you're dry fasting, there's something called metabolic water theory. So when you're dry fasting, well, this is actually not even a theory. This is actually just what scientifically has been proven to happen. But when you're dry fasting, the body can break down fat to get water. We can make our own water. Something interesting is I've always heard, you got um, like 3 weeks without food, you got 3 days without water, and then like 10 minutes without air, something like that, to show how important the breath is and how important water is. But actually, we can go a lot longer without water than we've been taught. We can go um, weeks without water, especially if we have more fat on our bodies, because our body can take that fat, go through this metabolic water breakdown, turn that fat into ketones, which is another form of energy other than sugar or glucose, glycogen, and um, and then it can also break that fat down into water. And it's this very, very super pure water, which I've read some people kind of like give it the nickname of like God water. Um, and the theory part comes in when you're doing a dry fast and the body is forced to break down fat for water, that kind of distracts it in a way from breaking down lean tissues or muscle tissues, because it's already breaking down that fat for water. So it's also going to be breaking it down for energy, which is ketones. And when your body has enough ketones, it doesn't need glucose, which it can get from the lean tissues. But there's not a lot of evidence yet really suggesting that, but there are some books and some theories out there from other scientists. But the body can reliably make its own water, which is more bioavailable. And so some people consider that because it's more pure and more bioavailable, that your body then needs less overall water, that it's sufficient in its own without intaking extra water. So my main source for dry fasting comes from this book called The Phoenix Protocol by August Dunning. And the technical Phoenix Protocol is a 7-day dry fast. And so he used to be a NASA rocket scientist, and then I can't remember exactly how, but he discovered fasting, and it became his passion, and he started studying it and practicing it on himself and on clients. And so what he talks about in this book is mostly just small study, measuring and testing himself and a few clients. And he got extra he did a lot of research as well, and he points to different researches. And the main research he's pointing to is Russian scientists, I believe in like the 40s and 50s, who did a lot of studying on the dry fasting. And a little anecdote is that the Russian scientists that like started studying the fasting was especially dry fasting is he had a dog. The dog became sick and wasn't eating and wasn't drinking. And he's like, oh, interesting. And then after a couple days, the dog was really sick and then became better and then started eating normal again. And he's like, oh, interesting. Just noticing that naturally the animal world, us included, we don't want to eat when we don't feel good. The body wants to reduce intake so that it has the space to an energy surplus to focus on healing. When we're eating, our digestive system is the second most energy usage thing after the brain. And because when we eat, we take in food, it comes into the stomach, and then all of our organs, we have the liver, the pancreas, the gallbladder, all these different things in here, the kidneys, it's all kicking into gear. It all has to turn on, produce enzymes, process things, get rid of toxins, move it into the urine, move it through the whole intestinal tract system. Absorb the nutrients, and do all of the huge process. All of our organs, so much of it is actually just about digesting, processing, and absorbing the nutrients of our food. And so when we're not eating, all of that energy gets put somewhere else, and it gets put into healing us. And so this Russian scientist noticed that for his dog, and then he started doing it for himself, and he noticed the benefits of it. So then he started studying it and researching it and getting grants from the Russian government and started doing these different studies back then. So in this book, The Phoenix Protocol, there's a strong emphasis on the importance of dry fasting. And he personally, this August Dunning, disagrees with water fasting, with wet fasting. He doesn't think it's healthy. And he says, you're hurting yourself when you're wet fasting. You should only ever be dry fasting if you're fasting. I don't personally agree with that, and the studies don't seem to agree with that, but I'm just expressing his viewpoint, and you can kind of take your own understanding from it. But yeah, he's really strong in this. He believes that dry fasting activates the creation and slash release of endogenous stem cells, which means like stem cells that are already within the body. And then when these stem cells are created and released, that there's this, leads to tissue repair and regenerating damaged organs or damaged parts of organs. And it's really dry fasting, he believes, helps keep us young and extends our lives up to 25 years. He believes that dry fasting, versus water fasting, helps prevent muscle loss due to this metabolic water processing using the fat. And so some additional theories from the Phoenix Protocol. that dry fasting is stronger than wet fasting, leading to a deeper slash stronger autophagy, which creates a deeper healing. That these stem cells are released in dry fasting, but they're not released in wet fasting. The wet leads to more muscle tissue degeneration, and dry does not. The dry creates this metabolic water, which is better for the body than drinking water. And when you're drinking water, then the body doesn't go into this metabolic water process. Dry forces the body to be 100% self-reliant, which makes the body that much stronger. It has a little bit deeper stress, which leads to a deeper adaptation, which leads to a deeper healing. And a quote from the book says, when you remove both food and water, the body has no choice but to heal. And so my thoughts on the whole thing is I fully believe in water fasting, wet fasting. I believe it's easier to do, and I believe it's incredibly healing. It's already been proven to be very beneficial in thousands and thousands of people in hundreds or thousands of different studies and practices. It's already been shown to be very healthy, and there has been zero long-lasting negatives, especially after the refeeding. So I mean, if you're fasting for a super long time, usually more than 40 days is when more complications can start to come in, depending on your health. And also it depends on which medications you're on and things like that, because you need to take food with your medication. Um, but if you are generally healthy already and you go into a fast, especially 10 days or less, there aren't any long-lasting negatives. And specifically with people are really concerned with muscle loss. But once you come back and refeed, the muscle comes back immediately. There's no long-term, long-lasting negatives in that way. The dry fasting, I believe, does promote greater and deeper healing. I believe it forces like something that's really interesting to me is that when you're dry fasting, it forces the body to use the water that's like in the cells. So it kind of dries out and dehydrates the cells themselves. So then when you do reintroduce water, you're filling those cells with the cleanest water. And so it's just a deeper access of cleansing, which I don't think if you water fast long enough, I think it happens the same way. I kind of picture that where you have this dirty pool, we'll say, like a dirty pool of water, and you can just make it smaller, make it a cup, a dirty cup, right? And you add water to that cup, and other water's coming out, the new water's coming in, but it's mixing together. So it gets a little bit cleaner, but it was already dirty water in the cup, and you're adding the water in. And then if you do that long enough, eventually the water becomes very, very clean. Um, but if you just emptied out that water and then added new water, that's going to be the cleanest. So that's what I picture when I think of the dry fasting versus the water fasting, in this way. And over shorter periods of time of like 10 days or less, the muscle loss is really like, I don't think it's very concerning at all. You will lose some muscle tissue, very likely, because the body will be looking for energy stores, and be breaking down parts of the body when it needs that extra glucose if the ketones aren't enough. But like I said, once you start refeeding, it all just comes back very naturally. One of the cool things about fasting is you have an increase in human growth hormones. And so that muscle tissue gets repaired and regrows, and no problem. Longer periods over 40 days can lead to organ damage, though. So, one example of that was a 20-year-old woman who did a 210-day fast, and then she died a couple weeks or a couple months later, from heart failure. And when they looked at her, they saw that her heart had kind of atrophied, and became weak. And so they didn't study her heart beforehand. So they don't know what her heart was like before. But the belief is that the fasting for 200 days, the body started eating away at its organs to protect itself, which I don't fully know how true that is because the body knows not to kill itself. Like even in the studies that show starving animals, like literally animals that have starved to death, the nervous system of the starved animals is perfectly healthy. Even though it, fasted to the point of dying, the nervous system was still completely healthy and intact because the body knows what it needs to take care of. So I'm not sure. I feel like maybe this woman had some difficult heart things beforehand, personal, completely unjustified theory. And then wet is also generally easier than dry. And so if you want to come and do a fast and you want to make it accessible, like do what you can do, just like with anything in life, if you're trying to start a new habit, do it in a way that you can keep it. Like a lot of people start going to the gym, they're like, I'm going to go an hour every day. And then it's like, you know what? That's actually a lot to ask of yourself. And then they find out that they can't go an hour every day. If they can't go an hour every day, then they might as well not go at all, and then boom, it all falls apart. So make it something that's accessible. And when you add water and make it a wet fast, then it's much more accessible and easier to keep up with. So let's fast. Let's fast.